Hi everybody, welcome to the November edition of Supper Club. We have found that it's either the full moon or
too close to Halloween.
Something, but this is what, take number 5 at this,
I think so.
Stick with us if we start giggling.
We're gonna try to make it through.
That's right. Last month you talked about the fact that we're all in this together. That was the Parker Palmer's first habit of the heart. This month we are focusing on kind of the opposite end of that it's also true that we are other. And so and how do we appreciate the otherness of other people? And as we got talking about it, the very first thing that came up is, well, let's make sure we're defining our terms a little bit. What do we mean by otherness? So it could be just, are we talking about different hair color, or are we talking about different religious differences, political differences, racial, economic, all kinds of otherness out there. And that's where we kind of began. But then we...
Yeah, and when we began, we thought, we have to start really broadly. Otherness begins the moment we're born. We are our own little selves, and everything that we encounter in the world as we come into the world begins to be something different than we are. We have that boundary that's there, right there. And we find out, of course, and all of us know that the material world is not singular. Diversity is a clear value of God. It is what it is. It's part of creation. And so otherness is really a part of everything that we are and everything we do.
And part of what seems to be of how we're wired is to be curious about that otherness, right? That's really the first impulse, as any of us come into the world, is, as you gave what I thought was a great example when we talked, is you may grow up with your toys in your room, and then either you go to a friend, you're old enough to go to a friend's or to another room, and it's like, wow, a whole new world of
other stuff
to explore. And our immediate kind of wiring says, I want to go toward that. But along the way, we start to find that some of those things that we encounter are safer, some are more dangerous, some can hurt us, and that's a pretty deep and early lesson for us in our lives, that we're taught, not every other is a safe other, right?
And we get messages about that otherness certainly from our family, from our culture, from the tribe that we're a part of, the group of friends that we're about. So it's what are the things that are, we begin to learn that not all things are safe. Other tribes, other races, other political parties, all of that. And that's really the shift. It's a moment when we shift from this curiosity of let's go find out about all this otherness to I may have to be wary of some of this otherness. So it sort of sets up an us versus them, and that's kind of where Parker Palmer is when he begins to ask the questions of us, to say and ask us to reflect upon what it means.
Does us and them necessarily have to be an us versus them? And sometimes it does, probably, right? Not everything is safe, but sometimes we're taught things, we're given messages that this other is not safe, and maybe we need to test those boundaries. We need to lean into this. But in order to do that, we have to sit down with the person who believes differently than we do politically. We're 2 weeks from the election, or we have to sit down with someone of another faith tradition and really test whether or not what we were taught was true. And the great example, almost iconic example from the stories of Jesus is the Good Samaritan, where you've got someone asks Jesus, "Who's my neighbor?" In other words, who's in and who's the other? Where's the boundary? And of course, Jesus lived in a very clear tribal boundary world, where for example, Jews were separated from Samaritans, Gentiles. There was very clear where those boundary lines were, and which is what made it so interesting that he uses this story of, first of all, 3 good Jews go by this person who's hurt on the road, and for different reasons don't stop and help, and it's a Samaritan who chooses to help, a Samaritan who crosses the line, the one who's not only is the hurt Jew and other for the Samaritan, but that Jesus uses the good person in the story, the person who's courageous enough to test that line, is not a Jew, but a Samaritan.
Is the other.
Is the other.
Right.
I mean, it's just a fascinating story.
So as you talk about otherness in your supper club tonight, and sort of what that means to you or how you define that, we'll give you just a few questions to talk about. remember last week there was a little homework assignment, and we asked you to perhaps have a conversation with someone in your life who was the other, have an interaction. So talk about if that happened, how it happened, what was it like, what was your experience there. Then move on to if you can disclose to each other how were you taught about otherness? Who were the others that your family, your culture, your upbringing taught you to say and name? That's other in that more, not in the good diversity way, but in that negative otherness
this person's
way.
dangerous,
Right.
or this culture's
Right.
dangerous.
Right. So what were you taught, and have you tested that truth as you've grown older?
And one of the questions from the Parker Palmer the agenda that they have is, think about a time when you felt like the other, when you were in a situation where you were very clearly the outsider. And just real briefly, I hadn't mentioned this to you, but I got thinking about this, and one for me was my very first job out of business school was as a manager at a Lithonia Lighting, a lighting manufacturing company. I was in charge of these conveyor belts,
Oh dear.
30 people, all of which were older than me. 80% were women, there was a couple of guys, and 80% probably were African American. So you had these older African American women, and I was dubbed college boy. And all of the things that I could use normally in my world to get in, either by appearing, trying to appear smart, or to speak well, or to dress well, all these things helped me not at all. I was very clearly on the outside and felt very helpless in that. It was up to them whether they were going to embrace me or not. I don't know.
Early on in clergy groups, as a woman, I often felt in that other place, surrounded by clergy that were seeing me as other, and I certainly felt that sometimes.
Mostly men?
Yeah,
I assume they're all men at that time?
30 years ago. So another question, another thing for you to think about is, how then do you manage the otherness of the world? If we agree that there is the nature of the world itself is diversity and otherness, how do you manage that? Are you more apt to think about your safety and security, and that's how you manage deciding how much otherness to let in your life? Or are you more geared into curiosity and exploration? Are you a person that will test and go and look toward the other until you have a good reason not to? So I think that might just be interesting to share with each other. Where do you fall on that line?
And then the adventure that Parker Palmer's agenda suggests for you is, this time find someone in your world who really is an other. Last month it was someone who you just don't have contact with, but they weren't clearly defined necessarily as someone who is a different religion or a different culture, and make contact with them, have a conversation. You don't necessarily have to talk about the thing that makes you different or makes you other to each other, but just see what happens when you cross that line. And certainly with all the politics running around, I think Democrats can talk to Republicans and vice versa. And,
have a purposeful encounter with something that in your head feels like an other.
Yeah, should be interesting.
Okay, enjoy your meal and have a wonderful supper club, and we'll see you next month.
Thanks, bye.